Hello, everyone. My name is Ian McDonough, and this is the Moot podcast. The Moot is a place to explore creative solutions to modern problems, everything from science and technology to economics and culture. We've got some phenomenal guests lined up, and I really hope you stick around to hear them. Today, we'll be speaking with computer science professor at UConn, Dr. Phillip Bradford, about entrepreneurship, research and development, and also how COVID-19 is going to change the way we live our lives. Originally, I was planning on having these talks face to face, but given the current situation, that just didn't seem like a very safe idea. I expect the next few of these talks to be remote, but hopefully we will change that as things improve. To be honest, I'm just happy to have a chance to talk to such interesting people. Over the next few weeks, we have guests scheduled to come on to speak about innovation and everything from economics to medicine, so I really can't wait. And with that, I give you the Moot. Joining me today on the first episode of the Moot podcast is Dr. Phillip Bradford, professor of computer science and engineering down at UConn Stanford. Today we're going to be speaking about a bunch of very important topics, but specifically education, entrepreneurship, and the world post-COVID-19. Phil, how would you describe your feelings at the moment regarding the wide array of changes we're seeing?
Well, I'm mostly a medium and long-term investor in talent development and science and engineering. So it's a little bit tricky because the sudden onset of this virus has been pretty tough, and so I don't see any. I'm hoping for a short-term solution, but I'm really much more invested in long-term research and development. And now that said, hopefully that'll lead us out of this complexity.
Absolutely. But I think we're also seeing a chance to reimagine some of the systems we've been using to develop talent, to encourage entrepreneurship, to teach, and also to work. So yes. I'm really hoping at this point, this is the beginning of a positive change, even if it's only a silver lining. I think we actually spoke about this in person a while ago, how the shift to working online in particular could have some really profound effects on society that people might not necessarily think about. And I think if one thing is very clear from this epidemic, a lot of the people who have been spending their lives commuting to work are actually very much able to do their jobs remotely. And you had actually had some concerns about this, but I'd really like to get your opinion on how things like remote work or remote education could really affect the world.
Well, I'm no expert on remote work or remote education. I'm learning about remote education a lot right now.
But, I think.
Hopefully I will be an expert soon. I think that it may be even dependent on the individual or the team. And so there's a lot of cues that we have. For example, when you're working with a classroom of students, you can, and they're right there, you can really pick up, the sense of the classroom and the sense of what students, how they're doing and how they're engaging. That's a bit harder online, just because of bandwidth limitations, for example, and
right.
And to see 40 or 60 students simultaneously, I guess it's doable. It's certainly harder. Now, some students may do better because they have less social distractions of their peers. Some students may do worse because they have more family distractions or more distractions from being home.
That's very true.
And so I think there's a balance there. I'm not sure where it comes out. I'm not sure where the average lands. And so I think that those are some challenges. In industry, when I've worked, at a distance with folks, there usually was an assumption that I got from somebody at a big, huge firm that you lose something in not dealing directly with folks, not working with them in the same room, even though we had very high speed and very powerful tools to connect people. My intuition tells me over time is that if I'm working with somebody at a distance in an industrial setting, Very often they report up their own hierarchy. I report up my own hierarchy, and my job is to make sure that I do what I'm supposed to do, and I deliver that to my boss. Likewise as theirs, and sometimes those two hierarchies aren't perfectly in sync.
Right.
Whereas if you're in the same building or the same room, it's easier, even as reporting to them, it's easier to get them in sync.
So you worry that there. So you're worried that there might be less cross-pollination of ideas between different departments, different hierarchies, different.
I think there is. I years ago worked with an engineer from a large industrial company who argued that when they push things like that, they always had about a 30 to 40% loss in productivity. Now, I don't know if that's been studied. It probably has. I'm not an expert in that area, but the remote work, it's always nice to be able to pop in someone's office or ad hoc have a quick meeting, even if it's by the coffee machine type of thing. Those type of casual interactions can add a lot of value, as well as with students popping into your office, as you have as a student. And
complete coincidental meeting, actually.
Complete or turning the corner, and here's somebody. A couple of quick questions and answers can actually save a lot of time and energy. So I think there is a lot to be said for being there physically. I think that helps everything from talent development to delivering products and services in an industrial setting to research and development. Even though research and development is interesting, it's a longer term process. But even so, at different turns and twists, it's important to get things aligned tightly.
I ask because in my mind, there are three big issues economically with the world today, or three areas which have become more of an issue in recent decades. To my mind, it seems like the price of most things, from food to consumer goods to electronics, has all been decreasing, with the exception of healthcare, housing, and education, all of which have sort of ballooned in price at the same time. My hope is that in a world where remote work is more feasible, you could theoretically see people moving out of expensive suburbs and urban areas where people move. To be honest, many people move there for the culture and the environment and the atmosphere, but many people are there for economic reasons.
Sure.
And in my mind, hopefully, remote work could play a role in making life a little bit more affordable for the average person. But I wonder, do you think that the 40% drop in productivity is specifically due to the medium of working remotely, or do you think it's potentially just the culture of the business hasn't quite adapted to working that way?
That's an excellent question. Well, first of all, we should find out. I don't know if that's a hard and fast rule. That was a rule of thumb that was given to me. And so that may even depend on the team and the nature of the type of business and the type of industry. I think it is an interesting question, and it's important in the long haul of how well does or doesn't remote work, or how good and effective is remote work. It's certainly effective. The question is how does it stand up to being there physically? And again, it may depend on industry, it may depend on context, and there may be learnings we have to do to figure out how to do it better. And
do you think it's maybe an issue of software? Just that when I hear that, well, these hierarchies aren't communicating enough, is that maybe just a function of, well, they're communicating with their superiors through email primarily, instead of something more like a Zoom meeting where everyone is seeing each other, not quite face to face, but sort of close to that?
It's possible that software can help. I've used a system that was a very high speed networking system a while back in an industrial setting that had huge bandwidth. But again, I think it was a question more of the reporting hierarchies. So even though there was, if there's 50 people in the room, you have 50 choose 2, which is a giant number of communication pathways. But the fact that you can optionally choose your communication pathway more easily in a physical setting, I think adds value. But again, it may depend on industry, it may depend on the complexity of what you're doing, and it may depend on how well defined the things are. If you look at areas in software engineering, for example, the if you have a really defined problem to be solved, and this is true in any area of engineering and applied science, and you find a firm that solved it 300 times, they'll be able to make a good bid. They'll be able to hands-off build it based on well-known specifications and understanding, and you probably don't have to communicate with them much at all. Sign the contract, set your specs, choose your flavors and colors and whatever else, and then boom, you'll get your product. However, a lot of what goes on isn't that simple. And if it is that simple, if you're buying a product that's been built 300 times, it's probably not a part of your mainstay of your product or service you're offering. It's a piece of the puzzle. So when you're pushing the edge, even if the edge is moderate R&D or mostly development, if it's something that hasn't really been done before, or you're trying to advance past your competition, communication is paramount. That said, anything is possible. I mean, but I'm not an expert in this, but I think it's something to explore for sure.
It certainly does lend itself to specific fields in my mind. Like going a little bit sci-fi, I could totally imagine like an engineer, or maybe even like I have a friend who's doing essentially industrial design right now, and he's working with a lot of these. I believe they're CAD files. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. I could totally see you and your coworkers meeting up with like VR goggles and like taking a look at the product from different angles, manipulating it, and that I think that could potentially work around some of the issues of not being face to face. But yeah. For instance, I actually just completed. I didn't sign up for an online course, but my course ended up being online. It was my business statistics course, primarily like an R coding sort of course. Yeah. And when you're dealing with code, you can actually, I'm not sure if it's better, but it's certainly helpful to have recorded videos that you can go back and look through, and having actual R files that you can take little snippets out of, break down, put back together, see what's happening. Yeah.
I concur. One thing that I would back up a little bit. I mean, I've worked in software and software engineering for many years, and analytics and things like that. Those are actually some of the more sophisticated things that humans really do on a regular basis. So I would say that that's probably not a great place to start in terms of looking at the ability to do that, remotely. I think that you want to start with an area that is simpler and more routinized, and see if we can be more effective there first. And the reason is that there's all sorts of discussions and plays here, and some of these are complicated international things that are going on and other things like that. But nonetheless, it's important to start with something that we're most likely to have quick success. And if you want to anything on the cutting edge, so if you say, let's suppose we go to one of the national energy labs or some other place, and we say we want to take what you're doing and distribute it. Well, a lot of the things they're doing is so cutting edge, it really requires entire days of sitting down with a chalkboard and grinding through sophisticated things. Remotely, I don't know that that's going to add a lot of value. I mean, I think remotely will take away a huge amount, and so that may be at the top of our hierarchy. Or if we go to NASA and help design, or go with Elon Musk or any of the other folks, or Bezos, and help design rockets. Right. If you're at 1,000 miles away helping design them, I think that's going to be clearly less effective, just intuitively, and add the possibility of other risks in the process. So I would stay away from that, and I would look at fields based on the sophisticatedness of them, and which is hard. People get personal about these things. Humans get all sorts of complexity with all that. So again, doing that, you may open another can of worms and end up upsetting a whole bunch of folks. So your stuff is more easy to routinize or not, et cetera, et cetera.
What fields do you think would be best for that sort of remote setup?
I actually don't know. I mean, I think that would be an interesting area to study. So, to find out what fields don't you need a lot of communication with for long periods of time. So one thing that's clear to me, although it's misconstrued socially, is engineering and applied science is a very social field. And so there is a view of the engineer, mathematician, scientist as being not very social. However, advancements in these fields is extremely social, and the working in teams and everything else. If you look at the articles, you'll see multiple authors all the time, and you'll see many authors who are not authors. People who are thanked and other resources that are required and everything else. And so these areas are actually extremely social, and they're also socially very deep. So it's not just, hey, I saw you at the coffee shop and chatted for 5 minutes. It's like, wow, we worked together for 6 months, and poking each other in the ribs and frustrating each other and finally, guiding each other in the process into some very interesting solutions. So those areas, I think that one of the problems in those areas is they're expensive and they're high risk, and some management is not overly capable of managing them. So it looks to other ways to deal with them, which often doesn't work, or at least in some cases doesn't work. Let me go to even Warren Buffett. So one of his favorite things to discuss is, he wants to buy companies that have deep moats. And whenever I hear him, deep moats being protections of their intellectual property or of their processes or whatever else. Whenever I hear that, and I like that, and I like Buffett's point on that, so I'm not criticizing that whatsoever, but I think there's two types of moats you can have. And I think that one type of moat is a type of moat that increases our standard of living. So I advance this product or service and give a better product or service than somebody else, and therefore I have a deep moat. There's another type of moat, which I would call monopoly, a monopolist moat, saying, hey, we control the market, we own the patents, which are legal monopolies, in effect, they're timed legal monopolies, or we simply are so big and sprawling that nobody would dare compete with us. And so, and that type of a moat, I don't know that gives society all that much value. It may give the firm huge value, and the shareholders might get terrific value by controlling a market, which is wonderful. But on the other hand, because they control a market, with that deep moat, they may choose not to increase the standard of living. And R&D is hard. I mean, people don't like to hear that, but that's very hard.
I think the moats are. Do you think broadly the moats are helping R&D in 2020 or hurting it?
Well, I think the monopolist moats don't help R&D at all. I think they block R&D. Right. I think those increasing the standard of living, those type of moats are, that is where R&D is driving from. And that can be done by huge firms. That can be done by entrepreneurs. It tends to be a more common view that increasing the standard of living comes more from entrepreneurial companies, although that is not always true. There's many huge firms that do a great deal of R&D, as well as the federal government. And I want to go back a little bit historically. And with R&D, there's two types of things that go on. So from Warren Buffett's point of view, perhaps it could be that a firm does R&D to enhance our standard of living, and they're going to be focused on the short-term problem solving or theories that are very applied to the problem area.
Right.
Okay. Because what they want to get out of that R&D is a routinized way to exploit or leverage value from an economic force.
Yeah.
But if you make it too routinized and too straightforward, then competition can jump into it easily. And so you are on a treadmill in a way.
Right.
So on the other hand, if you look at scholars, and this is where I think there's an entrepreneurial nexus, if you look at scholarship, and what does a scholar really do? What does a faculty member or a teacher really do? They simplify things and explain them in simple ways. Now, simple is not easy, and that actually, the process of simplification has got an inherent danger in it. And that inherent danger is somebody else can say, well, this book explains it wonderfully. Well, that book could be tens of thousands of hours of understanding and research and development and presentations. And it may explain it wonderfully and be beautifully done, and may have been edited by 30 people who've made suggestions and improvements. And so it can be a giant endeavor. And I know a number of books like this, just classics and beautiful. However, somebody says, wow, it makes this sophisticated topic easy. Well, that sophisticated topic, to make it easy, was extremely hard.
Right.
To make it simple was very hard. But somebody who wants to build a moat to increase the standard of living, for example, if they get a patent, well, patents require that you expose your whole process to somebody else by publishing it as a patent, which is good.
Yeah.
And that enables us to build on that. Now, of course, there is the limitation. You have to wait your 17 or 20 years till the patent expires, et cetera, et cetera. But the notion of R&D is extremely important, and the increasing our standard of living is extremely powerful. So I want to go on to talk about somebody else. So Thomas Kuhn, who's a famous historian of science. I mean, he's passed on by now, but he talked about the structure of scientific revolutions. And in doing so, I mean, he had a wonderful book on this that I've read pieces of. And in doing so, he basically, my takeaway was industrial revolutions or scientific revolutions are not linear. So if you invest 100 hours today and you invest 100 hours next month, you're not going to necessarily get 200. You're not going to get two equivalent size results out. Okay, you can go down the wrong path. You can find something that's very interesting, but perhaps not immediately useful. There's all sorts of other interesting things like this. And so his perspective that scientific evolution is not linear is very, very important. And that makes R&D all the more challenging. Then I want to toss in the great mathematician Hardy, G.H. Hardy, who was very proud that the work he did was not applied. In fact, he had said something to the effect, he doesn't imagine when there'll be a time where people see a warlike use for number theory or quantum mechanics. And of course,
oh God,
yes, and then both of these now, right now, in terms of computer security, if you look at the computer security challenges as a war, every time you go to the internet, you're using some tools where Hardy was a great expert at in number theory.
Yeah.
Okay, so in fact, there I would argue that Hardy, presaged a giant warlike behaviors in our internet and hacking. And he also, quantum mechanics, of course, eventually led to the quantum phenomenon and the power of the atom. Some of the power is hidden in the atom, which led to nuclear, on the good side, nuclear things that, heat houses and stuff like that. On the bad side, nuclear weapons. So Hardy, in a way, although he's very proud of doing non-applied things, his work led to some tremendously huge applications, probably in the hundreds of billions of dollars today in valuation. So there's very interesting things along these lines. And I want to even take another turn and talk about another famous guy who was the first president of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And this was Abraham Flexner. And Flexner was famous for talking about, and had an essay on this, the usefulness of useless knowledge. So
that's great.
Well, it's a great title, but I think
exactly, a great title.
It reminds me, and it's a nice read. He talks about Marconi versus Maxwell, and a whole bunch of very important folks, some very entrepreneurial and some very academic, and yet he almost contrasts the entrepreneurial types with the academic types, saying, look, the academics have this long-standing thing. We're going to be working with electromagnetic radiation for a very long time. We already have, and it has led to everything from the electric motor to, our cell signals to this conversation we're having is all, driven by this. And so it was a fantastic, set of work that Maxwell and all his predecessors had done, and subsequent researchers as well. However, Maxwell didn't build any huge companies or anything like that. On the other hand, many of these other greats, who I think are all great. I mean, I'm not going to choose sides here. Marconi and Edison and all these guys built some gigantic economic force, which added to people's standard of living. But so did Maxwell's work and others folks. So I think that with R&D, there's a big complexity here, and people choose sides sometimes, which I think is a mistake. Now, because a scholar's job is to take complicated things or things we don't understand and understand them and simplify them and explain them. Sometimes that's misconstrued as, oh, that's easy. Well, no, that's among the hardest things that humans do.
Right.
However, in exchange, we kind of add some glamour to that. So, today we can talk about Maxwell's equations. I mean, he's long gone. We remember him through his equations and some of his other work. We can talk about Marconi. We remember him a little bit less, perhaps, about his great work on radio and things like this. And the Marconi company now is also long gone. But these are all important things, and they all add to the intellectual infrastructure. And this is what I think really Flexner was talking about in the usefulness of useless knowledge. Is there any really useless knowledge? And certainly, if we went off and try to do some work in some very, obscure areas, it might appear useless, although there's a lot of very good R&D to do in very applied areas. It's very close to applications, so increasing the likelihood that we'll have some applications. And you can see this, I see this in some courses I teach. You know, you see, wow, these ideas evolved into these other areas and these other ideas and became parts of this new programming language and that old programming language and these other things and these operating systems and all this good stuff. And so it depends on how you structure the knowledge, you know, in all these areas in R&D. And I think that one thing, if I even want to take a step further, you know, on the industrial side, I take a look at Ray Dalio's ideas of radical transparency. And I'm no expert on Ray Dalio's philosophy, but I picked up on the news media his idea of radical transparency.
Right.
And science has some of that. Okay, so the whole scientific process is supposed to be a radically transparent process. If I do an experiment, I want anybody, even people I don't know who they are, to be able to reproduce it. Okay. So I want to have it thoroughly described. I want to have it carefully described. If I publish a patent, okay, if I obscure things in that patent and make it hard to reproduce, it can be depatented. You know, it can be put in the public domain. I no longer have the value of that intellectual property assigned to me. So radical transparency is maybe a step further than what we do in science and engineering, but it is not unknown to them by any stretch. And so there's a nexus here of the industrial and the scholarly. And I sometimes, and it's natural, you know, if you're on the A team, you challenge the B team. And if you're on the B team, you challenge the A team. That's a natural thing to do. And it's a good thing to do. Competition and challenge is good. You know, but I also always worry that sometimes one side dismisses the other side as, you know, in a way, yet they're both extremely valuable. And if we look at increasing our standard of living, they both play a huge role. And you know, developing R&D and developing talent in that R&D pipeline.
So speaking of choosing sides, I feel like there's right now there's two camps. One of them is arguing essentially that everything is accelerating, Moore's law is taking off, the world is becoming infinitely more complicated and interconnected. And then I hear this other side of people arguing that no, we've been in a state of stagnation since the 70s, everything is slowing down, things are falling apart. And I was wondering, what is your opinion? So I've heard some people on the either the declinist or the stagnationist sort of side of that argument argue that one of the reasons why things have plateaued the way they have in their model is because scholars are not seeing the benefits of their research the way the entrepreneurial class is, to put it.
Okay, so a couple, it's a great and important point. Has advancement slowed down? So one thing is the amount of money that the U.S. spends on a per capita basis in R&D has gone down since the 70s. Okay, I think the peak was 68 or 69. And I was just looking at today's net present value of the amount of money for the moon missions. So if you NPV'd it to today, it was only 25 billion. You know, we put humans on the moon, you know, for 25 billion, which is remarkable to me. You know,
is that inflation adjusted?
I believe it is. So check it out, though. And I think that's, you know, in honesty, it's not much money. You know, I don't know what NASA's whole budget is now, and its budget is distributed in a whole bunch of different areas. Right. So it's not simply putting people on the moon, and there's risk. I mean, look, Apollo 13 had some serious risks, and Apollo 1 blew up, and these sorts of things. So it's not, none of these things are like that. But, you know, the R&D, in my assessment, has wound down. Now, there's a couple of reasons I want to just jump out and say that. And the first thing that's important is even the entrepreneurial class, we use terminologies such as revolution. Okay, so go to a politician and say revolution, displacing employees.
Right, not their favorite word.
These aren't their favorite words. And so maybe we need to redress that somehow. And however, historically looking back at what happened in the two industrial revolutions we've had, the steam power industrial revolution and the electric power industrial revolution, these were revolutionary. Okay, these were huge jumps. But I think a lot of people today say, well, do I really want another revolution? Or would I prefer things to be kind of the same as they were for my parents? Right. And very often the comparison economically is, how are you doing compared to your parents? Well, you know, I'm doing fine. You know, and if that's the measure, then, you know, we're going to set up the metrics perhaps to not do much more than that. And so that's one challenge that I've seen. that I believe. So I believe we do less in R&D and we're less focused. There's a lot fewer. I was reading about the entrepreneurial class. There's a lot fewer folks involved in it, and I'm not surprised either because we have the operating costs in the U.S. value order. So I'm looking at different countries, they have different value orders. And the U.S. value order is, even though you'll see entrepreneurial billionaires in many of them, I think that kind of offsets the reality that it's very hard to do that and take those sorts of risks in the U.S. because of the cost structures we built up. You know, you want to build a company on your own? Well, 30 grand a year for healthcare, you know. Yeah. And then you know, you want employees, you know, X, Y, and Z for, you know, legal services. And so, you know, all of a sudden, and yet if you go back to the mid-1960s, healthcare took about 4% of the U.S. GDP. Today it takes about 18%. So you've lost an employee, okay, who had all your employees would have had health insurance in your small startup in the 1960s. In the 2020s, you know, all of your employees still have health insurance. You have one less employee.
Right.
Okay. And so that makes it challenging. Our legal costs also are very high relative to other nations. So we have some structural imbalances that have occurred, which is fine. That's what society has chosen. You know, that's just the way it is. But then in doing so, you're selecting out the opportunities for certain types of groups of people. And that's okay too. You know, it is what it is. But it's just choices we make, and sometimes some of these may even be consequences we want or not. I mean, entrepreneurs are dangerous. They use these words, you know, the creative destruction.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to your
revolution,
change. If you go to your car dealer and say, yeah, fill up, change the oil and do some creative destruction.
Yeah.
You know, who knows what you're going to get back? You know,
you never want to hear your accountant saying, "I'm going to do some creative destruction."
Absolutely, and so some of it may even be language driven in that sense, but I think that, you know, hindsight's 20/20. But when I look back at things I've done and people I've worked with, industrially, entrepreneurially, scholarly, and academically, you know, they're all different groups of people with different pushes and pulls on them based on value orders in society, and that creates what they choose to do and what they choose not to do.
Right.
You know, and so my personal thing is, I think that in applied science and engineering, coming from a scholarly angle, we can do a lot more entrepreneurship and launch a lot more real things. Now, that of course requires research and development money, which is challenging to get these days. You know, the companies tend not to say, "Hey, I think I'll fund you for this," because they need their funding for their own operations and their own R&D. Then you also get government. Government is stretched. Okay, government doesn't have a whole lot of spare R&D money lying around. That's for sure. Even for R&D that becomes a public good. So you know, you go and you do some research, you publish it in a radically transparent way. Hopefully, people can reproduce your experiments. If you're an experimentalist, if you're a theoretician, they can validate your proofs. And even if when they're closely aligned to, you know, real economic force, that's still hard to pay for because it's an expensive endeavor. And R&D always has been expensive and always will be expensive in some level. If you want to be cutting edge, you know, you've got to get some smart people. You got to get the front end technology. You've got to maintain it. It's tricky, and so, you know, so have things slow down. Sure, I can imagine they have, and in fact, I believe they have. But there's a lot of other things that have gone on too that I'm not sure what impact they've had. For example, if you go back, you know, even 1,000 years ago, and when people talked about the Great Silk Road, there was a gigantic amount of internationalism there. There was, you know, a big portion of the world's population was involved in international, you know, multi-continental trade. Okay, and which is awesome. Okay, which is great. And then it looks like after the last couple of wars, or during the last couple of wars, trade was, you know, very weirdly shifted in ways because of these horrible global wars. And then it comes back. And so these gigantic shifts also undoubtedly have big impacts on all the world's economies, and hopefully in very positive ways. But however, there'll be shifts, you know, and they do change things. Again, I think on average, it's very positive.
In your opinion, what would the best strategy be if, hypothetically, you did want to increase innovation and change? Is this something that can be done at a policy level? Is this something that needs to be cultural? Is this?
It's both. So it's a value order question, which value order to me, so societies have certain value orders. They value certain things, and the U.S. values entrepreneurship, and you get some tremendous entrepreneurs who have billions of dollars and things like this, and we hold them in great esteem. We have some great scholars we hold in great esteem as well, and a few universities have been able to do both, so in a very effective way. And I think that that's actually a great way to do it, because to be cutting edge, you need to be out in front of the new technologies in a big way. So how do we do it in a formulaic way, and how do we change our society to welcome more of it at a smaller rate? So the other thing is, there's only going to be so many giant companies that are built by people who become billionaires. I mean, unless we get,
Right.
And so most of the small businesses and even entrepreneurial businesses are tiny, and even technology entrepreneurial businesses are fairly small. And those comprise a very important part of our society. They give people great opportunities to apply their skills, to help them, to help society. And so everybody gets helped. But I think there's a value order question here. And the value order question is a cultural question, and it's also a question of how we can set things up. One thing that might be pretty cool to try would be to have, for example, right now research, and people would reject this out of hand, a lot of good research is kind of siloed, okay? And I've seen research agencies use techniques as getting letters from industrialists about how this will help them and things like this. And that's great, but I think that another model would be to have more direct reaching out into companies and helping them. Of course, that costs resources, and who you pick may be politically viewed and things like this. So it can be a very hard set of choices. But I do think that there's a lot of areas that we can advance, and I think that people have pride in what they do at every level, and I think it's important to, as a society, to help them execute, in a positive way.
Do you think, on purely economic, or analyzed from a purely economic standpoint, something like gaining a PhD is not economically worth it? You mentioned people take great pride in their work, and it seems like in many ways, and I'm not saying this is necessarily all PhDs, but potentially a plurality of them. It seems like employers are sort of relying on that passion and that drive and that willingness to sort of sacrifice immediate economic gain, specifically when they're dealing with PhDs, certain PhDs anyway.
Well, a doctor of philosophy is both a teaching degree and a research degree. So it's if you go back to the actual word doctor, it comes from Latin meaning teacher. Pardon me. And so there is always a question in my mind is, and certainly there's been many pronounced researchers who've gotten bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or none at all, if you go back far enough in history, of course. Thomas Edison would be one people point to. However, Thomas Edison hired some very strong talent over time, and some researchers, in the Navy and here and there. So a society that has so again, it's a value order. Do you for your group of people that are in the teaching class or education or talent development class, how do you reward them? And if you choose not to, then it won't be as good. Your talent development pipelines won't be as strong. In terms of research, there are many people who go into research, and research can pay well or not, and so it's all very variable. For example, if you set something up in your own basement and you do research and you're not hooked in socially to what's going on, the needs are, you may do some great research, but its economic outlets may be very poor. Again, R&D and engineering and applied science are very social, when they're applied well.
Yeah.
So, which is a surprise to many people, but actually they really are. So I think that PhD is a great degree to get. I think also a lot of degrees are wonderful to get. I'm an educator. I'm the guy who'll tell you great things.
Yeah. Of course.
We do they pay you back? Well, it depends on how you want to get paid. So you can get paid in cash. You can get paid in glamour. You can get paid, by writing the classical book on a topic, which may not sell a huge number of copies, and they may not be a bestseller, for example, but maybe in the field it is. Okay, and maybe those people who honor you are people that you respect, and so it's very important to you. And so there's all sorts of things that go on, and you can look at areas like Silicon Valley and faculty at Stanford University and things like that who've done both, which is to me the ultimate. They go and they do great scholarship and they bang out some classic books and they build great companies. And so I do think that's something that in engineering and applied science makes a lot of sense. It's again, you're fighting some value orders. So both industrial as well as academic value orders are specific, and sometimes they're at loggerheads, and maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe they should be more welcoming. Sometimes they are very welcoming. So it really depends. And I think it's even better the closer they are. But I think that one thing to, even if you look at negotiating, when you negotiate, you really have to understand what precisely are your goals. And I think that part of understanding what industrial goals are, their goals in R&D is to, ideally increase their standard of living, our standard of living collectively, by adding value through R&D. And now that means they may not be so interested in publishing great theories about expansive areas of knowledge, but they are very interested about great theories on their particular, the particular area they're delivering. Right. And even there may be a little bit skittish about publishing those theories because, hey, that'll tell my competition how to jump in and grab some of this economic force I've got. So, on the other hand, scholars are a little bit different. They're really, they get rewarded by publishing great theories, and people like Abraham Flexner talk about the greatness that some of them have done. So there's both sides of the equation, and I think that we all have to work together and create and so my vision is having a value order that appreciates both and shows that both really have a huge influence on each other. It's not just the great scholar who goes and buys a cool technical toy, or the great industrialist who goes and buys a classical scholarly book. I think they both can work together, in a very tight way, and that takes a huge amount of knowledge, and also, sometimes it takes, swallowing a bit of your own pride. Hey, I'm not great at everything. I can appreciate the industrial stuff is really hard, and I can appreciate the academic stuff is really hard, and and I think that is an important thing to drive home in a way.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, but we're coming up on your cutoff, I'm afraid. I'd love to keep going, but I don't want to.
I get it. I thank you so much for the opportunity, and
I'd love to do this again sometime. This has been very interesting.
Awesome. All right, Ian, well, thanks so much. And,
absolutely. Again, thank you so much. I'm Ian McDonough. We've just had a conversation with Dr. Phillip Bradford, and that's the Moot.